I'd like to call to order the regular Pinehurst Board of Adjustment, notice duly given. This meeting is being held electronically using the virtual meeting platform Zoom in an effort to comply with Governor Cooper's executive order to address the COVID-19 health emergency. We have a quorum, and the designated voting members for this meeting are permanent members Leo Santawasso, Joel Schreiberg, Cindy Burnett, and myself, Julia Latham. Our first order of business is to seat a new permanent member for this board following the end of David Kelly's term. I'd at this time like to move to seat Jeremy Hooper as our fifth permanent member of this board. Do I have a second for this motion?
Second.
Okay, I made the motion. It was seconded by Leo. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Terrific. The motion's made and carried. Jeremy, welcome to our board as our fifth permanent member, and thank you for your service.
No, thank you. I'm honored.
Next, I'd like to let you know that Sonia Rothstein is also on our call today. She's sitting as a potential alternate in case any of our permanent members need to recuse themselves from this hearing. Sonia, thank you for being here today and helping us out.
Of course, thank you.
So housekeeping, procedurally, we are obviously being videotaped. Please speak clearly, make sure your microphone is unmuted before you do so. I'm going to proceed a little more slowly and deliberately than we normally do when we're at the Village Hall, just to make sure everybody has had an opportunity to speak and to be heard, and to make sure that we're ensuring due process for the applicant and also for the public. As a reminder, please do not use the Zoom chat function during this time in order to maintain transparency for our meeting. As a threshold issue, looking at the application before us today, the board must decide before opening the public hearing whether the merits of the application for the property at number 10 Rockland Lane, we have a threshold issue we must decide before opening the public hearing on the merits, and that is whether or not the application for the variance at 10 Rockland Lane is sufficiently different from an application for a variance that was put forward for this property in 2003. Under section 5.1.7b, in order to hear Mr. Atkins' application for a variance today, we must determine whether there has been substantial changes in the conditions or circumstances relating to the matter. As such, the board has to determine if this application is substantially different from the previous request, or if circumstances have changed relative to that request. Reviewing the material that Alex has provided for us, I'd like to suggest that this application is substantially different and that circumstances have changed relative to this request. Unlike the 2003 application, in the packets that we received, we have a survey of the property and a surveyed site plan and building plans. Moreover, in 2013, the standard of review for issuing a variance was changed from the property could have no reasonable use to the land would be difficult or impossible to use if the variance was not issued.
Get on that.
I'm sorry. Jason,
Hi,
did
sorry.
you hear that?
Yeah, now we're back. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. So I was saying the standard of review for issuing variances has changed from in 2003, it was that the land had no reasonable use. And now we would find that the land would be difficult or impossible to use. In light of these changes, I believe that this application is both substantially different and that circumstances have changed since 2003 relative to this request. At this time, I'd like to ask members of the board to share their thoughts. Are we of a different mind? Any opposition to this determination?
When they came through with the floor, the house located on the lot, and it looks like they made an effort to place the house within the confines of the ordinances, and we're not able to by just 42 square feet or whatever. I think that makes a difference. And so I agree with you, Julia.
Julia, I would just like to mention that I'm cautiously concerned to rehear the case, not opposed to it. So do you mind just revisiting a couple of the points that are the substantial changes that you see?
Sure. The main substantial change that I see, as opposed to the difference in the applications, the main substantial change is that in 2003, when this case was heard before, the standard of review that the board looked at is whether or not the applicant could make no reasonable use of the property without the variance being issued. In 2013, that standard changed. And now we are asked to find whether the applicant would have whether it would be difficult or impossible to use the property. So that standard has changed from no reasonable use to difficult. In my mind, that's a difference in circumstances. We're actually being asked a different question than the board was asked in 2003.
Thank you.
More substantially, folks, I believe that this application is different, primarily because different parties are involved in this application, completely different and separate and apart from the original 2003 application.
But it's the same piece of property.
The standard for making a determination as to whether it's the same or different is one of the main reasons is that different parties are involved. If it was the same party asking for the same variance, then we could not hear it. It would be a matter that has already been adjudicated and settled and finalized. In this case, it's a different application. There are different people involved. There's more substantial information presented, and the ordinance primarily has changed to the extent of what the side yard or what setbacks are required, and for the reasons that are necessary to be proven that the variance is justified.
Joel, do you have any comments?
I'm sorry?
I was just wondering if you had any comments on this threshold question.
No, I don't see any harm in hearing this. I frankly don't see any substantial difference between the prior language and this language. But I don't have a problem with proceeding with the variance, with the request for the variance.
Okay, from the board members, Jeremy and Cindy, I heard some reservation on your parts. Are you comfortable moving forward into public hearing, or would you like any more discussion?
I'm comfortable moving forward with the hearing. I think there's more information for us to look at and ways to consider it. And I would have preferred that they had made a request for something other than a 15-foot variance, but then it would definitely be a different request. But I think we have much more information to work with than they had in 2003. So I'm fine with that, with moving forward.
Jules, I think your definition of the differences in ordinances helped me to move forward. I'm still cautious, however, I'm comfortable.
Okay. At this time, then, would a member of the board like to move to exit our regular meeting and enter the public hearing for the property at number 10 Rockland Lane?
I'll move that we leave our private meeting and move into the public meeting for 10 Rockland Lane.
Second.
Okay, a motion has been made by Cindy Burnett and seconded by Leo Santawaso to enter into our public hearing. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, a motion has been made and carried, and we are now in public hearing number 1. Rather than attempt to swear in everyone who's going to testify at once, I'll be swearing in each witness separately and immediately prior to their testimony. At this time, I'm going to ask if any member of our board needs to recuse themselves due to either ex parte communication, conflict of interest, financial interest, or in having the outcome of this hearing already determined in their minds. Okay, hearing no need for a recusal, I'm going to remind everyone that the Board of Adjustment's decision must be made solely on competent material and substantial evidence in the record. At this time, I'm going to ask Alex to speak first by reading the request into the record and providing the backstory for this application. Alex, there you are. Hi, can you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're going to give here today is the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you very much. Please proceed.
All right, thank you. So the purpose of this public hearing is to receive testimony or a variance request from section 9.2A, tables of dimensional requirements for the property addressed as 10 Rockland Lane, further identified by Moore County parcel ID number 000299602. The property is located within the R10 high density residential zoning district. Specifically, the applicant and owner, Kirk Atkins of Ennismore Properties, LLC, is requesting a variance from the 30-foot golf course setback to allow for a 15-foot setback. Within your guys' packet, you received the staff report, which I will also bring up and share at the moment. A little bit of the request on the background, again, is to vary the 30-foot minimum golf course setback from the property line in the R10 zoning district to allow for a 15-foot minimum golf course setback on a side lot line that abuts the golf course. This golf course setback is applicable to this property on this side lot line that abuts the golf course due to the fact it does border the golf course along 2 lot lines to the north and the east. The lot line to the north is the property line subject to this request and is considered a side yard for the vacant property. The property line to the east is the rear lot line and abuts the fairway of the golf course number 1. The applicant proposes a 15-foot setback, which is consistent with the side setback requirements of the R10 zoning district. And if this subject property did not border a golf course, would be consistent with the normal setback for the R10 zoning district and is also the applicable setback on the opposite side of the property. The subject lot, like many in the neighborhood, was created by a subdivision of Pinehurst, Inc. in 1973, as indicated on a map recorded with the Moore County Register of Deeds in Map Book 11, page 19. This particular property is shown as Lot 147 and of Phase 2, Unit 2 subject property, and this subdivision is attached as part of this exhibit of the staff report. This is one of the last few remaining vacant lots from the original subdivision, and records from the Moore County Register of Deeds and the tax department indicate that the current property owner purchased this property in March of earlier this year. The lot is approximately 0.28 acres in size, or a little over 12,000 square feet, which is more than the minimum 10,000 square foot requirement within the R10 zoning district. The subject property, as mentioned, is adjacent to Pinehurst Resort Golf Course number 1, which is zoned RD for Recreation Development District. And the subject property is also adjacent to one existing single-family residence, which was built around 1981. Most of the other single-family residents nearby in the neighborhood are also part of the original subdivision and are also all zoned R10. And most of the existing residents appear to have been built anywhere between the mid-1980s and the early 1990s. The area of the golf course, which borders the lot line subject to this variance request, is currently wooded and off in the distance contains a halfway house or a comfort station. It does not appear to be in what is referenced as a field of play. Within the 30-foot golf course setback being applied to the north side and on the rear lot line, this property will have 3 30-foot setbacks, as the front setback for the R10 zoning district is also 30 feet. The remaining south side lot line, as mentioned earlier, would have a 15-foot applicable side setback. Previously, whenever the agenda was made public and you guys received your packet material, the applicant had not yet submitted a proposed house plan or a building footprint on a survey with this application. However, that has now been made part of the record and is labeled as Exhibit O, which I will get to in just a minute. And as we touched on earlier, a previous property owner and applicant had applied for a variance request for the same subject lot line to the then Board of Adjustment in April of 2003. As we know from looking at the transcript and the minutes, which are also made part of an attachment of this staff report, was voted unanimously to deny that request. And you have those information again made as part of this request and in this packet, the staff report. Along with the staff report, staff has also included and labeled the following exhibits for review and consideration of the board. And I would like to also make matter of record at this time, which are again, Exhibit B, the original subdivision plat, Exhibit C, which is the applicant's consent to hold the meeting electronically, and Exhibit D are the minutes and transcript from the previously discussed April 2003 hearing on the matter. In addition to these exhibits, the applicant and current property owner submitted the following and will also now be made part of the record, and that are Exhibit E, an application, Exhibit F, deed of ownership, Exhibit G is a existing survey of the property showing both the 30-foot golf course setback as well as a proposed 15-foot setback. Exhibit H, which is a map image of the neighborhood used from Moore County Geographic Information System software. Exhibit I, which is a GIS map of the neighborhood with structure footprints. Exhibit J, a GIS map image with approximate measurement of adjacent property owner's location from the shared side lot line. Exhibit K, L, M, and N are all photos of the subject property facing various view sheds from the property itself. Exhibit O is a letter from Bob Farron, Director of Golf Course and Ground Management of Pinehurst Resort, on their position on the requested setback. And then again, Exhibit P, which has been made available as earlier this week, includes building plans and a surveyed site plan showing the proposed house location on that subject property. So again, just to be clear, I want to make sure that all these exhibits are now officially entered into the record, and I can attest that the property was properly posted and adjacent owners were notified. And any of those who, when we get to the point to allow for participation of other folks, we have, it looks like, received consent from most of the folks who are in attendance today, but we can address those as we go forward.
Okay. Alex?
Yes, we had, Leo was talking and
I'm sorry, I was talking without putting the unmute on.
Oh, okay.
A question just to add to the record as to whether or not this lot is considered to be a corner lot.
Want to know if this would be considered a side lot line. It would not be considered a side street setback there on that property line that's subject to this variance request due to the property owned by the resort. Actually, it abuts the adjacent lot line and not the side street.
I'm sorry, could everybody hear the final part of Alex's statement? There was some audio overlap there. Okay, I'm going to assume we could. Leo, any other questions at this time?
Not at this time.
Okay, Joel, do you have any questions for Alex?
Not at this time.
Jeremy?
No, ma'am.
Okay, Cindy?
Not at this time.
Okay, Alex, I have one question for you. Exhibit O, which is the memorandum agreement submitted on behalf of Pinehurst LLC. Did you have any direct communication with Mr. Farron or anyone else at Pinehurst LLC to authenticate the agreement?
Thanks for asking. I have reached out to Bob Farron actually quite a bit, and he did authenticate this letter. He did state that this is the resort's position on the proposed request, so I can verify that as we have before with these letters. Also, I did give Mr. Farron the opportunity to participate in the meeting if he wanted to provide consent, and we could give him the login information, and he respectfully declined to participate.
Great, thank you very much. At this time then, I'd like to call the applicant, Mr. Kirk Atkins. Let's see now, is he going to come up on my screen if he speaks?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, there you are, fabulous. Can I please ask you, sir, to raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're going to give here today is the truth?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Terrific, thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to invite you to put your application forward before the board.
Okay, thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to present the facts associated with my setback variance application. I'd like to thank Mr. Cameron, who's been very helpful and professional in assisting me in completing this application package. I'd also like to thank each of you all on the board for your service. I know that this is a voluntary obligation and your participation is greatly appreciated, especially during this uncertain time. And I can honestly state that I believe that my application has not been slowed down in any way whatsoever associated with this COVID-19 crisis. And I think that's a real testament to this board's and the technical crew there at the Village of Pinehurst inventiveness and commitment. But before I begin my remarks regarding my application, if I may, please, I'd like to give you a chronology of the property acquisition and the setback variance application process. I entered into a contract to acquire 10 Rockland Lane on February the 28th, 2020. I paid no due diligence money and no earnest money. This transaction was scheduled to close on March the 13th, 2020. Before I entered into this transaction, as part of my due diligence, I met with Ms. Jamie Reed of the Village of Pinehurst Planning Office on February the 26th of 2020 to determine if it was possible to apply for a setback variance. Ms. Reed referred me to Mr. Alex Cameron, who very kindly and very professionally assisted me on that same date. Mr. Cameron stated that it would be possible to file a setback variance request, and he informed me of how I needed to execute that process. In fact, Mr. Cameron informed me that there was a similarly situated property at 80 Rockland Lane that had recently filed for a setback variance request and was successful in their application. Mr. Cameron, because I'm new to this whole process, so I didn't know really how to do anything. Mr. Cameron explained how I could review the 80 Rockland Lane application. So another thing that Mr. Cameron had talked to me about is that I would need to get consent from Pinehurst Resort that they would have no objection against my application. So after I had that meeting with Mr. Cameron, I immediately reviewed the Board of Adjustment video on the 80 Rockland Lane setback variance application. And my conclusion after watching that video was that my application was going to be extremely similar to that particular application in all material respects. And in fact, another thing after watching that video was, and again, you have to know that I'm a novice at this, and I've never done anything like this before in my life. And when I watched that video, at the conclusion of that application, there was a discussion with the board members that seemingly, again, from my naive perspective, that these setback variances, where you have a couple of sides on the golf course, seem to be a commonplace occurrence. And that there was discussion amongst the board members that there was a possibility of seeking a legislative redress of that issue by talking to the village council and then perhaps changing the planning and development ordinance. At least that was my perception, and perhaps I could be totally wrong on that. And then to carry on March the 2nd of 2020, I met with Mr. Bob Farron of Pinehurst Resort and obtained his verbal agreement that Pinehurst Resort would not object to my setback variance application. So based on these due diligence actions, I concluded there was a very high probability of obtaining the setback variance. And then I decided to go ahead and complete the acquisition of 10 Rockland Lane, and I consummated that acquisition on March the 11th of 2020. I then marched off and I started to draw up plans for a home that was fitting and appropriate, because I really like that Doral Woods neighborhood, that was fitting and appropriate to that neighborhood, and that particular property's unique and favored location facing the 10th green on Pinehurst course number 1. And then I was just marching along happily. And then this Saturday, May the 2nd, I opened up the Board of Adjustment agenda, because I think it has to be published 5 days before the meeting. So I opened that email up for Mr. Cameron regarding my hearing of today. And I'll tell you all, I almost fell out of my chair, where I was so shocked to read in his staff report that there was a previous application on this property and that it was denied 17 years ago. Had I known this information prior to my application, one can never go back in time, but I believe that I would not have completed the transaction. But I did. And I'm informing you of this chronology only to let you know that I was totally unaware of this previous setback variance application until Saturday, May the 2nd. And in my conversations that I've had with Mr. Cameron and then others at the planning office, my understanding is this is the first time that this has ever occurred where a second request has come up and it wasn't known until sort of right before the meeting. This new information that I got on May the 2nd then made me change many things regarding this previously denied application, and it made me modify my application and become much more specific regarding my request. And that's why you all have been inundated, and I apologize for that, but I hope you can understand my situation, that I didn't know that this happened. And that's why you've been inundated with all these new exhibits that are in Exhibit P. And additionally, and it seems as though this hasn't been communicated, but I tried to communicate it, or I thought I communicated it to Mr. Cameron, that I also want to modify, and this goes to, I'm sorry, Jeremy, forgive me for calling you by your first name. I forget, you're not on your screen, your last name, but
Sure.
I formally want to modify my application and not ask for the 15-foot setback and only ask for a 25-foot setback. Okay. Instead of the original 15-foot setback in my original request. So let me be very specific here. I have developed plans to construct a house that is fitting and appropriate to the DeVal Woods neighborhood, and particularly with the unique characteristic of the property overlooking the 10th green of Pinehurst number 1. And so I would respectfully ask you if you could pull up Exhibit P and then look at page 7 of Exhibit P. And that's the survey with the proposed house dimensions overlaid on the building envelope. I don't know if you have the capability to put that on the screen, or how can I communicate with this, or does everyone have a copy of that in front of them?
We should all have it. It came with our packets. Alex, is that something you can get up on the screen for us?
I have it on my screen.
I was going to say, I should have it pulled up right now. It's showing on my screen.
I don't, but that's okay because I have the hard copy. I'm with you.
Okay. I do not have it on my screen, but it's not a problem. I have a copy in front of me as well. So may I continue on then?
Yes,
please?
go right ahead, Mr. Adkins.
Okay.
Leo, do you have it?
I have a hard copy, yep.
Okay.
Can I interject from the peanut gallery? I don't have it.
You can't see it, Mr. Planker?
No, ma'am.
Okay, let's give it a moment for our technology to catch up with us.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Okay.
Do we
May
need
I?
to, hold on, Mr. Adkins. We've got
Okay.
a bit of a technological situation.
Okay.
Alex, I'm just seeing the agenda. Okay, I'll wait for your high sign. There we go.
Okay.
Is there anybody viewing who cannot see page 7 of Exhibit P? It's noted at the bottom with the numbers 146.
No, I've got it on my screen.
I have it.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Adkins.
Okay. So on that particular slide, you can see the lines that are sloping from the right to the left that is showing the proposed house location. And then in the upper right-hand corner of that shading area where it shows proposed house location, you can see the amount of the property that is encroaching into the current 30-foot setback. If you look extreme upper right-hand corner of that, you can see that the encroachment is coming from 26.28 feet. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. That means from my property line, the extreme part of the house is 26.28 feet from that property line. So in other words, it is encroaching by 3.72 feet. Do you understand that?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay.
Got it.
And then if we look at that going from the eastern edge of the property, so that would be the extreme upper right hand, going from the east to the west, you can see diagonally there is a triangle that is encroaching into that setback area. And there is a line coming out of there and going up to the upper right. And it says that there is 42 square feet of house that is encroaching into that setback area. Is that understandable?
Is that
Yes.
line that you're talking about of the house, is that about 11 1/4 feet?
My calculation, and I'm sorry that I did not have my surveyor do this, by my calculation, and I've done the math, and perhaps Mr. Jeremy, who's I think an engineer,
It'd probably be 22 feet.
That's exactly right. It's 22 and a half feet.
Right, okay. I just wanted to clarify.
And when you do the math, the 22 and a half feet times 3.72 feet, that, and you take it as a triangle, let's say it's a perfect triangle, that equates to the 42 square feet. And so, consequently, what I'm requesting is to have a variance just of 5 feet. And the only reason I'm asking for 5 feet instead of 3.72 feet is just to give a little tiny bit of wiggle room, which would be 1 foot and 3 inches, to make sure that we don't fall outside of that perhaps, if you grant me that. So in other words, what I'm requesting is to change the setback from the existing 30 feet on the north to only 25 feet. So it's instead, in my original application, I'd asked to move it to 15 feet. Is that understandable to the board?
It is to me.
Okay. And I would be very happy to entertain if, and I don't know how to communicate this in any clear language, I would be very happy to also limit this request along that diagonal. Maybe give me a foot of space just along that diagonal where it's encroaching. So I leave that I'm very happy to if you would consider entertaining something like that. Okay. Now, I have 5 key reasons, and they're the facts associated with those reasons why I'm requesting this change in this north property line setback. So number 1, the property is unique in that it has 3 sides of 30-foot setbacks. These 3 sides of 30-foot setbacks create a building envelope on which a house of a width of only approximately 45 feet could be built. The lot is approximately 90 foot wide with a 30-foot setback on the north side and a 15-foot setback on the south side. Therefore, 45 feet are immediately vacated due to the setbacks. If the variance were not granted, the building envelope would mandate a house to be constructed that would be incongruent with the style of homes in the neighborhood because it would make it a pretty narrow width. This creates a hardship due to following the strict application of this ordinance. This very narrow house would create an odd appearance from both the golf course and from the street. Therefore, the home would not be maintaining the same aesthetics of the immediate neighborhood. Number 2, this lot is the last lot to the north on Rockland Lane. And I would ask you if you could please look at Exhibit N, and perhaps if that could be pulled up onto the screen. Does everyone have Exhibit N?
I believe we do. Any
Okay.
objections?
Which one is it?
Exhibit N, that's should be on your screen, Joel. It's the photo of the north property line facing north to Halfway House.
Hang on.
Okay, go ahead,
ahead.
Mr. Chair.
Yep, go ahead. I got it. Where else at?
Okay.
Okay.
So what this picture is a view from sort of the center of my lot, and you can see that stake with the pink flag on it That is the northern boundary of that lot, 10 Rockland Lane. And then that is looking northward towards that halfway house. All of the land to the north up to the halfway house is owned by Pinehurst Resort, and there are no other platted lots. The request for the setback variance is to the north. Consequently, no neighbor would be impacted by the granting of this variance. Then number 3, the hardship has not occurred due to any actions undertaken by the applicant. This lot is only 12,377 square feet. By taking out the incremental, I'm saying 25-foot setback on the north property line, the design of the house that is appropriate for this neighborhood and the favored location overlooking the 10th green cannot be built on the current building envelope as the house is currently designed. Then number 4, the north border of the lot for which a setback variance is requested is not in the golf course field of play. The north border of the lot is past the end of the 10th green on Pinehurst course number 1. And then if you'd please keep looking at this Exhibit N again, between the north property line, there is 184 feet. So from that stake that you see to that halfway house, there's 184 feet of pine trees and pine straw. And you can see it's pretty unkept part of the golf course. Then the course turns backwards away from Rockland Lane. That's the 11th tee box. So consequently, the variance request is within the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance, and there is no impact on public safety. And then if you could please look at Exhibit O, and that's the letter from Mr. Farron. And then I've spoken to Mr. Farron, and then he's written this letter to the Board of Adjustment attesting that the Pinehurst Resort does not object to this variance application. Okay. And then the fifth and final reason for requesting this variance application is that many of the houses in the immediate neighborhood, and by this I mean Rockland Lane, were built in the early 80s before Pinehurst had incorporated and had developed planning and development ordinances. Before these early Rockland Lane homes were, because these early Rockland Lane homes were constructed before the PDO, very few of the houses in the near neighborhood have respected the current setbacks. So now, if you could please look at Exhibit J. And Exhibit J, this is a feature on the Moore County Tax Authority website that they call GIS, and this is all new to me. Perhaps you all are very familiar with this. I don't know. And what this shows is the footprint of the house and how it is set up on the respective lot. And what I have shown you on this particular chart that I've gotten off of the Moore County GIS website is my next door neighbor, which is 20 Rockland Lane. And you can see in that north corner there where I've got that little blue circle drawn, there's this functionality and this software where you can do precise measurements. And then you can see that big blue arrow that goes over, and they measure that for you. And that is demonstrating that that neighbor is 6.77 feet from their property line, which is also my south property line. And then if you could pull up Exhibit I. And what Exhibit I is are showing 20 Rockland, 30 Rockland, 40 Rockland, and 50 Rockland, and then their respective house footprints. And again, this is from the Moore County GIS information. And as you can see there, virtually all of those homes are getting, I measured the one on 20 Rockland. It looks like 30, 40, and 50 are certainly within that 6 foot or so from their northern property lines. And I don't know if you want to pull this up as well, but it's in Mr. Cameron's staff report. If you could pull up Exhibit A and then look at page number 7, which is entitled Area Zoning Map. That's the same. I assume Mr. Cameron got that from Moore County GIS, which is exactly what I used. That's another indication of how close these neighboring properties are to their respective borders. And then if you could also pull up page 8 in that staff report, and that is entitled Aerial Map. And then that shows, I think that's Google Earth or something, but that's functionality also on that GIS website that shows the actual houses and then how close they are to their property lines. So virtually all of these houses that are very near, they're really near to their north property lines. And so by requiring my house to respect the 30-foot setback on the north property line, this creates a hardship and makes that particular house out of character with the neighboring properties. And so for those 5 reasons, that's why I'm respectfully requesting the Board of Adjustment to grant me the setback variance on the north side of 10 Rockland from that current 30-foot setback requirement to my modified request of only 25 feet. I'm modifying it from the 15 foot that I said, and I would be very happy to consider, as I said previously, of also somehow, I don't know the language that one would use, how it goes diagonally when we looked at the house envelope. I would be happy to entertain limiting the setback there as well. So that's all that I have of my prepared remarks. And I thank you all very much for your time and consideration. And I hope in some way that you would consider, because I feel like that this is kind of a troublemaker request, because it looks, I didn't know about that previous setback, declination. So I hope you realize that this is totally new information to me. And I apologize again for kind of inundating you with all of these new exhibits right at the last moment.
Are you finished, Mr. Atkins?
Yes, sir, I am.
Julia, I have some questions, if I can go ahead and do that.
Sure. Let's start with Leo and then we'll move through the board.
Thank you. Mr. Atkins, were there any contingencies or conditions associated with the sale of this property?
No, sir, there were not.
You own it free and clear?
Yes, sir, I do.
Is this going to be your permanent residence?
I do not believe that's going to be the case, sir.
Are you a builder?
No, sir, I am not.
Have you considered any way to position the lot so that there could not be a variance request? The way that this is unfolded is, when I did my due diligence, as I said in my opening remarks, I thought that the probability of getting the variance was extremely high based on all the things that I said previously. And then I went off, and then I knew it was going to be a very tight envelope on which I could build. And then I tried to construct the most narrow house that I could possibly do. And these Would you consider flipping the plan?
when you say, you mean going from, because
let me go ahead and explain what I'm looking for.
Yes, sir.
Just flipping the plan over so that the driveway is more toward the southern side.
Okay.
I've tried to, I'm an engineer and I'm also
Okay.
a surveyor. So these things appeal to me. And I think there are several reasons for doing that. Because we're trying to do things on paper that stretch or whatever, too much humidity, they stretch or shrink or whatever. It's not really clear to me, it may have to be done on the computer, that if you flip the floor plan, I believe it's possible to construct a house without a variance. And there are a couple of reasons to justify that. As I said, the driveway would be further away from the intersection. What is now the north side of the house would become the south side and would have, therefore, what's now the south side would become the north side, which would have a more pleasing appearance than the way it's situated now, with a side garage door that doesn't look too appealing as you're coming in Doral Road, looking at the site. And there's going to be better views, in my opinion, when the patio is up in the northeast corner of the property, to have a better view of the golf course, of the 10th green, and what is it, the second green of number 1? It would open up more vista to you personally than you have right now. And the most important factor is it may not require a variance, but that's not going to be able to be determined until you can really get the accurate footprint of the flipped floor plan to see if it can really be contained within the setbacks as they are now. Would you be willing to do that, to just consider that?
I would certainly be willing to consider that. A couple of comments I take your point completely, Mr. Santawasa, about when one comes in on Doral Drive, that house is going to be seen from quite a long ways, and I have modified that house quite a bit to make it more appealing by putting beams up on the top of it, because that's going to be the curb appeal. Now, I don't know why they situated the property this way, and if they could have, when I say they, the surveyor and the designer, it's Artiga Design, that could they flip it and it fit on that envelope? I just do not know the answer to that, sir. I would certainly consider it. And if that could happen, I would do it. Because I hear what you're saying, that northeast corner of the property is actually the master bedroom, and that would give a nicer view onto the 10th green. So it is quite an interesting idea.
Let me make a comment. I mean, I play that course a lot. I played it just the other day. Leo, nice observation, but it never surprises me with you. If the covered porch, if you flip the house the way Leo is talking about, you would have a view all the way down the 11th fairway. You'd have a view of the 11th tee box, all the way, a straight shot all the way down the fairway. And I believe you'd still be able to see, well, I don't believe you'd still be able to see the 10th green. Let me just make a comment to you. I just built a house a year ago, and my builder said to me before we laid the foundation, he said, why don't we flip this house? And since I know everything in the world about everything, I said no. And now I kick myself in the butt because he was absolutely right. I'm just going to suggest you listen and give some serious consideration to what Leo is saying, because I personally think, having just built one of these things, you might be very happy with this thing flipped the way Leo is talking about. Mm-hmm. I think the view from the street driving up will be greatly enhanced if you did that. But again, it's your home, you do what you want. It's just an observation.
Jeremy, you look like you have a question.
Well, just on the same subject, I was also going to bring up the topic of mirroring the house. But would we still be in a setback situation with the covered patio currently as drawn if we mirrored the home?
I don't think so. I think it would clear it.
I do too, Leo. I mean, he's 22 feet back. If you take a look at the floor plan, the bedroom, which is where the 22 feet is measured from, extends past the right side of the covered porch. And I think if there is going to be a difference, it's a matter of inches. But Jeremy, I think it'd be very, very close, but I think it would get in there.
Yeah, I was going to mention also that if we look across the plan and where the setback would come across the home currently, it would extend past the patio. It's going to be very close.
But I would hate to base our decision today on what might be and what might happen, and then put him in a position where he can't ask again for a variance, or that have to.
Well, let me clarify things and say I'm not willing to consider this application until the applicant makes an attempt to see what it looks like if the floor plan's flipped.
Well, and we can always continue, Cindy,
Yes.
to give Mr. Adkins the opportunity to have an engineer in not a casual way, in a deliberate way, go ahead and see about flipping that plan, setting it on the site, and then coming back with a potentially revised proposal. There's no problem with continuing if that's something that is interesting to the board and interesting to Mr. Adkins.
Mr. Adkins, do you have any immediate need, immediate being next 30 days, need
No,
to get
sir.
this answered?
No, sir.
Okay.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Adkins at this time?
One other comment, Julia, and I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but I would be willing to sit down with Mr. Adkins to show him exactly what I'm talking about and how I think it could be situated to eliminate any variance request, if that is appropriate.
I will defer to Alex on that one, or as to whether or not that might be an ex parte communication such that you'd have to recuse yourself if we reheard this.
All right, so in any case, to avoid any type of potential conflict with that, I would advise highly against it. As we know, you shouldn't be discussing any merits of a case before the board. Any ex parte communication would have to be fully disclosed, and anything that would be talked about or considered would have to be openly deliberated for everyone to have the opportunity to hear and understand what was discussed. So I would highly advise against that. If there's any opportunity for any clarifications that need to be made, I can certainly be the conduit to explain a little bit clearer, but I do believe it seems like, and this is my opinion, that we all kind of have an understanding of what Leo was getting at.
Well, let me just offer a compromise here between what Leo suggested and what I think I'm hearing you say. So if Mr. Adkins comes to you with this set of plans, so make the assumption that we adjourn this meeting, or we, whatever the terminology, to for another 30 days or 2 weeks or whatever the minimum is. And Mr. Atkins came to you with this set of plans and said, can you help me put this so it conforms? Would you be willing to help him with that, Alex?
I can be willing to help gain the understanding of what Leo was getting at. I think the understanding is getting something to fit into the building envelope. If someone were to prepare something and share that with me, I could make a general determination, hey, it's within the building envelope, but I can't do anything outside of my normal duties.
Yeah, I just think either Latitude Builders or your surveyor can, certainly Latitude Builders can flip this and the surveyor can stick it back on the map and you can know in 5 days, working days, whether this is going to work or not. And you'd be happy with the house and the layout.
I have a question that may be timely also.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
So, Mr. Atkins, can you elaborate a little bit on the extent of the effort that you've taken to fit the home into the current building envelope and maybe some of the efforts that you've made?
So I knew that this was going to be a very tight envelope. And then I started looking at house plans of extremely narrow that had the feature of windows on the backside that could take advantage of this favored position of overlooking the 10th green. This was the most narrow plan that I found that achieved those objectives of there are really large windows on this house. And so if you're asking financially, how much money have I spent? I can answer that.
No, sir.
We have tried our best to fit it on there. I understand exactly what Mr. Santawasa is saying about flipping it. And we can, I'm not opposed to that. And I can certainly go back. I don't know what everybody's time crunches are in terms of can they turn this around as Mr. Schreiberger said, can I turn it around in 5 days? I don't know. But I can certainly, and I would be willing to undergo the expense because it's not going to be free to see what happens when we flip this in terms of does it fit on the envelope or not.
Any other questions for Mr. Adkins at this time?
Yeah, I just have one. So if we table this meeting, I'm not sure never table the Board of Adjustment meeting. If we were to table this meeting and you came back to the VOP with a request for us to reconvene this meeting, would you have a problem with that?
No, I would not have a problem with that, sir.
Okay. I mean, at that time, if it wasn't possible, we would simply reconvene the meeting and make a decision on this setback. I mean, you wouldn't have lost anything except, which is why I asked you if time was of the essence here. You wouldn't lose anything. You just, it'd give you time to think about it, take a look at what it would be, then come back to us.
If it were possible.
Yeah, we could just pick up where we laid off here.
Okay. If it were possible to reconvene, time is important.
Sure.
It's not like I have a schedule that must be adhered to. But if we could do it in a very short period of time, I would be happy to undertake the expense to see what would look like if we flipped it.
Define very short period of time so we know what time frame we need to work with.
I think my guys could turn it around in probably a couple weeks. Would that be something that you guys could accommodate?
Alex?
As long as we can continue this public hearing to a date, time certain, we would be well within our statutory limit. I think the board and the applicant would need to have further discussions potentially of a time that these 5 folks who are sitting on the board would have the availabilities as well as the applicant. So I think that's more of a question for the board and the applicant than it is of staff at this point. As far as I'm aware, I'll be available and we'll have the same options that we have right now available at the same time period. I do know that the Planning and Zoning Board, we're considering a special meeting sometime mid-late May that has not been finalized yet. And then we also have the opportunity for the regular June meeting date, which is 4 weeks away from today. It's not 2 weeks, but that is an opportunity that could be on the table as well.
The other consideration that I have is I have on my list 4 additional participants who were interested in testifying on this matter. And I'd like your advice, Alex, on if we were going to continue, whether it made sense to allow them to testify at this time while we're all together, or whether it's more appropriate for to ask them to testify when we're continuing and have the revised plans. I don't want to inconvenience them. I want to hear what they have to say. I just want to do it in the way that is most relevant to the petition that's before us.
And unfortunately, again, I'm not going to be able to advise you a whole lot with that, as again, it would be a consideration I think that the board would need to make. We are here, we are in an open public hearing. There's been a request or business before you. One of the duties, if you will, and the powers of the chair is to continue a meeting to a time and date certain.
Right.
And however, if folks are made the opportunity, and I will state that the neighbors in the area have made the most of their opportunities to try and contact staff to make sure that they could be present for this meeting. It may be certainly worthwhile asking.
Yeah, I'm very aware of that. Before I speak to the participants, the neighbors, I saw that Cindy had a question for Mr. Adkins. I want to give her a chance to raise.
Well, one concern is if the house is flipped and it fits in the envelope, there's no need for a variance. So there's really no need for then the request would be dropped, I would assume. Is that correct?
I would imagine at that point that Mr. Adkins would withdraw his application.
And so there would
Yeah, I imagine if Mr. Adkins meets with his engineers and his surveyor and they say, you know, lo and behold, Leo and Joel's idea worked out great. While it would certainly be his decision about whether or not he wanted to pursue Plan A or Plan B, he would have the opportunity to withdraw the application if he could accomplish what he needed to.
Okay, and so I would just like to, consider that when we're looking forward to extending the meeting. And then, Mr. Adkins, you said that you were not planning on living in this house. Are you building it then for rental or for resale?
For resale.
Resale? Okay.
What I'd like to do at this time then is speak to, I'm going to have trouble with that last name. Powerski? Vince? One of the neighbors, is he available?
Yep. You did very well. I'm right here.
Okay, thank you very much. Could you let me know your view? Would you like to address the board today during this hearing, or in the event we continue to have the opportunity to come back at that time? I'd like to make most of your time.
Actually, what I have to say fits right in with everything that's been discussed already.
Okay, well then why don't I go ahead and swear you in.
I do have my right hand raised.
Okay, very good. Do you swear or affirm that the information that you're going to give us today is the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Can you go ahead and let us know what evidence you'd like to present to the board?
I would like to back up a little bit and let you know that I was a surveyor in the military some 45 years ago, a long time ago, and also a mathematician for the survey unit that I was in for a 3-year period of time. And I looked at the map very closely, and I have some concerns about the north, not the north lot line, but the north side of the building. The north lot line is 111 and a half feet thereabout. And the proposed house is 64 feet in depth, going from west to east, east to west, whichever way you choose to take it. So 64 feet plus the 30-foot setback, 30-foot.3 setback in the back is already 94.3 feet. And to have a 30-foot setback in front, you're requiring 124, actually almost 125 feet of setback. I've been out on the property several times. Obviously, I don't have my survey equipment or any of those means to sit there and do accurate measurements, but I believe that the northwest corner of the house may be encroaching on the front 30-foot setback. It's hard to tell with the arc that the survey has there, and he does not have any measurements in there to let us know what the actual width of the arc is at that particular point. He does have 30.4 inches from the corner running at an angle away from the lot line, but I'm not quite sure that would fit. Now, with that said, I can't read Leo's last name, but what Leo said in flipping that house, what is right now currently as the south side of the house, if that were to be flipped, that is narrower on that side. And I think it would take my concerns out of play for that northwest corner because of the narrowing of the house. So I think that is another thing that would need to be looked at too in regards to the mirroring or flipping of the house in its direction. And Alex said that he was concerned about that side of the house, but I noticed on the plot plans that there's a garage door actually that faces the halfway house for a cart barn, for a cart entrance. And that obviously is not a very good thing to be looking at when you're coming down the road. So that would be faced away from the road and I think would have much better curb appeal. And that's pretty much all I needed to say on it.
Okay, and then I just need to confirm because I cut you off. Am I correct that you're at 255 Doral Drive, which is across the street from the subject property?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Is Mr. Planker on the call?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Hi, could you please state your name and address for the record, and then I'll swear you in?
My name is James Plankar, Plankar. I live at 30 Rockland Lane.
All right. And can I please ask you to raise your right hand?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're going to give here today is the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can we hear from you, please, Mr. Planker?
Yes. I would like to refer the board to the minutes and transcript of the April 17th, 2003 hearing, because I believe that those minutes and the transcript speaks for itself. There's quite a discussion of the zoning in effect in 1980, 81, 82 when these lots were platted. And I think it would give you quite a lot of insight. This lot has been platted since the early 80s. So there's no change in the dimensions of the lot for 40 some odd years. I too took my old T-square and measuring instruments and tried to calculate some building envelopes. Just because Mr. Adkins bought that lot, it does not confer a right to build any house that he chooses on that lot. There is an approximate building envelope without the variation of about 3,000 square feet. And while he is having difficulty shoehorning this house onto the lot, a reduction in size is certainly within his capability. And in fact, the board in 2003 suggested that. The next point I have refers to exhibits H and I believe those are the correct ones, where he talks to, my paper straight here. Give me a minute, I need to get my paper straight. In Exhibit E, Mr. Atkins states that the restrictions of the current setback severely impedes the construction of a home consistent with the neighborhood. The neighboring property to the south was constructed in 1981 and is situated 6.77 feet from the owner's south property line. I delivered earlier today a plat of survey for that specific piece of property, and Alex has that copy of that plat. And that setback is 15.9 feet, not 6.77 feet. Everybody see where that is?
You have to go over that again for me. I'm sorry.
Okay. The north lot line of 20 Rockland Lane is depicted on your screen. And Mr. Adkins talked to the fact that stated that the minimum setback on that lot is 6.77 feet, which is really at the far northeast corner of 20 Rockland Lane. The actual minimum setback is 15.9 feet.
Mr. Planker?
Yes.
Can I ask you where you may have obtained this survey from?
The plat of survey was obtained from the owner of 20 Rockland Lane, and Alex has a copy of that survey, and it's certified. It's a certified copy of the survey.
Thank you.
The actual survey. The information on the GIS with the county does not show the actual dimensions of the house on the property. It's just a depiction of the property. He further states that the lots for 30, 40, and 50 Rockland Lane all have 7-foot setbacks on the northern edge. And you can see that with the second one down. That's my property at 30 Rockland Lane. It shows a very narrow north setback. That setback is actually 20 feet. On the opposite side of my house, it shows again a very narrow setback. That setback is also 20 feet in actuality. So this map is incorrect, and as a result, I believe that Exhibit E and its attendant exhibit should be rejected. Any questions on that?
Any questions for Mr. Planker from the board? Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming.
I have one further point for your consideration.
Sure.
The property in question here is not unique. If we look at the various zoning maps available to us, there are two other properties, both almost directly across the street from 10 Rockland Lane. And I can find it. Both have 3 setbacks, a golf course, and in one case, 2 roads. And in the other case, a golf two golf courses and a road. And each of those property owners were able to situate a nicely sized house, one of them being 2,800 square feet. So a house can be put on this lot without going through all kinds of machinations. There are existing examples of those right within a couple of 100 feet of this lot.
Judy, can I ask the gentleman a question?
Go right ahead, Joel.
Mr. Planker, given the change in dimension that the gentleman is asking for, do you still have your basic objections to a ruling, an affirmative ruling on the 42 square feet he would be looking for?
Yeah. Of course, today is the first time we hear about a 42 square foot encroachment.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I'm a purist. I believe that if one can put a house on the lot, then one should put a house on the lot without encroaching on someone else's property.
So the answer is even with this reduction of almost 15 feet, you would still be opposed to a variance?
Yes, unless I had other reason to want to approve it. There is nothing that causes Mr. Adkins to build this house. He can tell us that he wishes to build it, and you can then provide him the variation, and then he can turn around and build something else. I don't know that there's a requirement that once you grant the variation, that he's required to build what he said he was going to build.
No, but he would have to build I think, I'll ask Alex and Judy the question, but he would then have to build something within the envelope that we okayed.
Yeah, I would guess. Yeah.
No, that's a fact.
Okay.
So given the light of what we've just said, what I'm trying to ascertain is, because I place a lot of value in this, would you still be opposed to granting the variance for the 42 square feet?
If the house in all other respects meets the requirement, I would not object.
Okay, that's my go. So in other words, you would not be opposed to granting the 42 square foot variance if the house meets all other building requirements?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Guardedly, yes.
I understand.
I just wanted to say, Mr. Planker, that I worked a lot with Wake County GIS, and you are absolutely correct. These are all estimates. It's not exact building plans, probably more the pictures of roof lines that they translate into two-dimensional. So I agree with you on that point.
That literally takes out a large argument in terms of neighborhood conformance.
Any other questions for Mr. Planker at this time? Okay, I believe we have one other person on the call from the neighborhood who wished to testify today, and that's Ms. Peggy Rainey.
Yes.
Ms. Rainey, can you please let us know your address?
Yes, I'm at 275 Doral Drive.
Thank you. And can you please raise your right hand?
Yes.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're going to give here today is the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, ma'am. We'd at this time like to hear any evidence that you'd like to present to the board.
Well, my concern about the house is, I think the other gentlemen have gone over all of the layout and so on. My concern when I heard about this was the size of the house as you are approaching Rockland from Doral because of the curve and so on in the road. To me, I would like to see, if he wishes to build a house there, that's his property. I would just ask him to be concerned about the neighbors and the sizes of houses that are in this area. Most of us here in Doral have homes that are anywhere from, in this area, 2,000 to 2,300 or 2,400 square feet. This is not a big house area. And so to try and put a huge house on that curve when you're coming into this area of Doral, I think is going to be, I just don't think it's going to appear in a nice format for Doral. So I am concerned about that. I just don't wish to see a huge house sitting on that property. If he had something that was more conducive to the property that is around him, build it.
Do any members of the board have any questions for Ms. Rainey?
Yeah, I have the same question that I had for Mr. Planker. We just saw these plans today with the elevations that are suggested for the site. Given that house, do you think that conforms to the neighborhood?
Oh, it's a big house. It's a big 2-story house. And when you come around the corner of Doral onto Rockland, I think it's going to stick out like a sore thumb.
Are there any other 2-story homes in Doral?
Yeah, there are. Mm-hmm. Yes, there's several.
One across the street at 2,800 square feet.
Sure. Uh-huh.
Okay. Mr. Atkins, I haven't looked at it. How many square feet is the proposed house?
3,076.
3076?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's just a bigger house than is next door to the house. It's a bigger house than the house across the street from it. There's only, I just feel like that where it's situated, there are 2-story big houses in Doral, but let's face it, some of these houses that are in Doral are on 2 lots. And I know the people that bought them. I've been in Doral 35 years. So I've watched these houses being built. And a lot of them are neatly tucked into larger lots. The lots are, as I said, were acquired.
So it's more like
by people that wanted a bigger house, bought 2 lots.
But I guess my question to you is, and I'm not trying to pin you down, but there are homes in the 3,000 square foot
Probably not.
range, the same as these in Doral. Is that correct?
No.
I know of one on El Dorado. I know of one, another house that is on Doral. I know of a couple of houses that are in Thunderbird.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Ms. Rainey? Okay, thank you, Ms. Rainey.
Could I ask one last question?
Of whom?
This is Jim Planker. Could I ask one other question?
Of whom? Who would you like to address your question to?
Could Mr. Adkins provide a rendering that would give us a view of what this house would look like?
I believe there is a rendering in the packet. Am I right, Alex?
Yes, in Exhibit P, it shows all of the elevations of the home. So it shows front, back, left, and right. And I honestly I'm very respectful of the neighborhood and the golf course location, and I'm trying to construct something that's beautiful, but that's a subjective thing.
Okay, thank you. I see on my notes that there is another potential property owner who wanted to test, not a potential property owner, a property owner who wanted to testify today, Mr. Derek Alty. Is he present on the call?
He's present, but he hadn't got
Yes, we're on mute. Okay.
Yes, I'm present, Ms. Latham.
Thank you. So Mr. Derek Alty, could you please state your address?
Yes, it's 270 Doral Drive.
Okay, and could you raise your right hand for me? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're going to give here today is the truth?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Please go ahead and present your evidence to the board.
Thank you. I have 2 or 3 questions, one procedural in nature. As I understand the variance application process, an application for a variance can be filed by the owner of the land, by an agent or a contract purchaser of the land. And in the latter case, the agent or contract purchaser needs to be specifically authorized by the owner. I didn't see anything in the record where Mr. Atkins was specifically authorized to appear before the board on behalf of Ensmore Properties LLC. Perhaps I missed it, but there's nothing in the record that I could find where that authorization was given by that corporation to Mr. Atkins to appear here today.
I can speak to that, Julia and everyone else, and I'll also let Mr. Atkins speak to it himself. After obtaining the application, and as Mr. Atkins had indicated earlier, he and I had many conversations prior to an application being made for a variance before the board. When the application came through and I saw the property owner came through, the Moore County tax data hadn't quite updated from the recent sale and transaction of the property. So that's not uncommon. We always double check. So I double checked, and I also noticed that the new property owner also matched what the applicant information was, which was and the deed that was also submitted with the application for the LLC. I looked up the Secretary of State website, and I was able to look up the corporation and see that Mr. Atkins at 70 Carolina Vista was the authorized person, and I can submit that as part of the record for the board, and I'll also let Mr. Atkins speak to that.
That's absolutely correct, what Mr. Cameron said.
Okay, thank you, Alex, for clarifying that. My second question actually is a substantive one, and as I understand, again, the North Carolina Development Ordinance, which governs this process, that variances are not granted according to the ordinance simply to remove an inconvenience or financial burden that the zoning requirements would otherwise impose on a property owner in general. Mr. Atkins, by his own admission, has no intent to live in this house. He's simply building it for resale. So to the extent that, a home can be placed on the property, not subject to a variance, then certainly there's no inconvenience or other financial burden to Mr. Atkins by doing so, first. Second, as I understand again the law, it requires that the relief be granted where it's difficult or impossible to use the property because of some particular physical attribute of the property itself, or some other factor unique to the property for which the variance is requested. And I would also second Jim's motion that there is nothing particular about this particular property or anything that is particularly unique to this particular property that warrants this variance. Thirdly, as Ms. Rainey observes, there are very few homes in the Doral Woods neighborhood that are 3,000 square feet in size. Very, very few. In fact, there's almost none that sit on what amounts to a corner lot in Doral Woods. My home would be directly across the street from the home that Mr. Atkins, by his own admission, has no intent to live in and simply wishes to sell to another party. I'll look at the second story of this home, which will now block my view of the 10th green and the 11th tee box and a portion of the 11th fairway. I mean, I don't think that's at all in keeping with the spirit of the development in Doral Woods. And in fact, I think it's just the opposite. Very, very few homes that are two-story homes, fewer that are 3,000 square feet in size. Mr. Atkins, by his own admission, can fit a home on this without a variance. And if that home is less than 3,000 square feet, well, most of the homes in Doral Woods, frankly, are between 2,000 and 2,300 square feet. That would clearly be in keeping with the neighborhood. This thing is nowhere in keeping with the neighborhood. So, you know, even with a reduction in the request for a variance, I'd be opposed to this home in its entirety. It's entirely not in keeping with the neighborhood.
Are there any questions for Mr. Alty from the board? Okay, thank you very much for your testimony and for joining us today. Kelly and Alex, has anybody else from the community indicated that they wanted to give testimony about this application?
I just received word from Kelly that no one else has notified us to participate.
Very good. Okay, give me a moment to organize my notes because there's a lot of paper. All right. Board members, at this time, do you have questions for any of our witnesses? All right, hearing no questions, is there a motion to close the public hearing and re-enter our Board of Adjustment meeting?
Julia,
Yes.
I did want to interject, if I could, please, that I do feel that if the board were considering a potential continuance of this hearing, that I think it would be best to make that while we're still within the public hearing and not close it before we.
So we can get availability.
Yes, we can. The board can certainly stay within the public hearing without closing it to either deliberate and continue the meeting or act on the request before you. There's no need to close it,
Okay.
especially if there's going to be a continuance. I would recommend staying within the public hearing and not close it.
Great. Thank you for pointing out that procedural. Okay. Well then, board discussion.
Say that again, Julia. I'm hard of hearing.
No problem. Alex has recommended that we stay within the hearing
Okay, gotcha.
for discussion. Thoughts at this time?
So Julia, just for clarity and from my understanding, especially if we were to ask for continuance, we would be doing so in asking Mr. Atkins to make an effort to make a home fit on this, inside this building envelope. Is that what I'm hearing? And then in turn, if he came back to the board showing a lot of effort, then that would in turn become his hardship in doing so. Is that just for some clarity on why we would ask him to ask for a continuance?
Sure. I don't know whether or not that would become his hardship. That would be up to whoever was making the motion at the
Sure.
time. I can't speak to that. But I believe the thought would be that if we continued the meeting to ask Mr. Adkins to make an effort, that it might change his application to reduce the amount of setback that he was asking for, or in the alternative, could negate the need for the variance at all.
I think this gives him an opportunity if he wants to build a house that does not fit within the requirements and the setbacks, then he still has an opportunity to come before this board and ask for a variance. So I think it would be good to reschedule and give him that opportunity.
Can we ask him his opinion?
Sure.
Mr. Atkins?
I'm sorry, Jeremy, repeat what you just said, please.
Sure. Mr. Atkins, can we get your input on whether or not you would wish to continue this hearing and application to in turn meet again with your home designers and builders to see if there would be a remedy inside of the building envelope and then return with an answer or not?
Okay.
Or would you rather us move forward?
My preference would be that I would undertake and I would come back to the board with trying to flip this. And if it could fit within the envelope, that would be wonderful. Then we don't have any issue. However, my preference would be if you would consider looking at the variance, perhaps granting it today, and then I'm under oath, I would go and see if I could flip it and see if it would fit within the envelope. And I would be willing to make a commitment now that if it does, in all respects, I would go with the flipped version. Does that make sense to you? Is that?
It does.
That makes sense to me because there's no reason to come before the board. If you flip the house and it fits within the footprint, then this is a moot point.
Yeah, it makes no sense to me either. I'm inclined to think that you should make the structure fit the lot, not make the lot fit a structure. I would recommend and move to continue this public hearing to some date certain. I don't know what that date would be, but I guess we need to talk about that before we make a motion.
Well, Alex, is there a legal requirement that this has to be done in a certain period of time from the date of the notice in the paper?
Good question, Joe. Variances in a lot of these type requests before the Board of Adjustments don't have a time limit or an expiration or a time of reasonable action, like say a application for a certificate of appropriateness would. So we have the opportunity to continue for a couple of weeks, a month or better. I think that's something, again, that the board would need to discuss and see what availability each of these 5 city members have, as well as the applicant.
Hey, Alex. Can we get some clarification? Mr. Atkins mentioned that he is willing or now asking to modify his request to 25 feet. Can we get some legal understanding if that he's able to make that, or we only would be voting on the 15-foot setback request, and then we could make the change?
If he's appeared before you, we had a request before us that was properly noticed and advertised for that request. We're here within that meeting. Any persons who wanted to be privy to that meeting are now here. And him as the applicant, the party before you amends the application within the public hearing. I think it's well within the power of the Board of Adjustment to hear that request as amended, and obviously take the evidence and make your decisions based on that amended request and the supporting facts or the offered facts in opposition to it, and making your decision. So I definitely think that's an option, is to hear an amended request, but of course that's decision by the board.
Okay, we currently have a motion on the floor made by Leo to continue this meeting to a date certain that we would need to determine before we left public hearing were his motion to carry.
I'll second the motion, but before I do that, I'd like to hear Mr. Atkins give us what he thinks he can work with, just to put a time frame on this. But if he wants to just let it hang out there and tell us at some point in time when he wants to reconvene us, I'm happy with that too.
Mr. Atkins, I think Joel is asking, would you like us to consider a particular time frame to look at the calendar and look at 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out, a month out?
Could we look at, I don't want to unduly inconvenience the board, but could we look at because I don't know how long it would take the engineer, the designer, and the surveyor to complete all their work, but I would think 3 weeks they could do that. Would that unduly inconvenience the board?
Mr. Atkins, we're here to serve you. You're not here to serve us.
Okay.
So with that idea, we would be looking at May 28th, board.
Let me interject. May 28th, we do have a scheduled HPC meeting at 4 o'clock. So we would be using pretty much all of our resources that we are now for that such meeting. Now, we could potentially look at that Wednesday, the 27th. So we don't have to pick a Thursday, but there is a conflict with Village Hall on the 28th.
Okay.
Let me ask one more question, Junior.
Yep.
Mr. Atkins, given what I just said to you about we're here to serve you, would you like 4 weeks and then you don't have to lose sleep over this thing? It's up to you.
3 weeks, I think we should be able to come back with the property flipped and see whether that fits on the envelope or not.
Okay.
Okay, board, knowing that there is a motion on the table and seconded to continue this hearing, we're tentatively looking at the afternoon of the 27th. Any discussion?
That works for me.
Works for me.
Works for me.
Leo?
Works for me.
Okay, good for me as well. So we have a motion made to continue this meeting and reconvene the 27th at 4 o'clock. That's been made by Leo and seconded by Joel. I'm going to go ahead and poll the board. Cindy?
Yes.
Jeremy?
Yes.
And it's Joel?
Yes.
Leo?
Yes.
And it's a yes for myself as well. So the board is unanimous that we will continue this matter until the afternoon of May 27th at 4 p.m. when we will reconvene. And we'll allow Mr. Atkins some time to find out what efforts can be made on amending his application. At this time, I'm going to ask if there is a motion to close the public hearing and re-enter the Board of Adjustment meeting.
Since the public hearing has been continued, Julia, we won't need to close it. We'll just pick it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. All right.
Mr.
I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know if this is appropriate or not for me to comment during this time. Could you, or should I work with the staff on what the procedure would be? Would it simply be I come back with a new site plan with the flipped building, and that's what we discuss, or will we go through all of the exhibits again? And
Kirk, you could just work with me on that before.
Okay.
At least I'll work with you, and we'll try to establish a deadline so we can make sure that any information that comes of what you're going back to the drawing board, so to speak, so we can get any of that information out in a appropriate time for all of us that are present here participating in the meeting, if needed. So be in touch with me early and often.
Alex, just a question for you. Is that okay, Julia?
Yep.
If Mr. Atkins comes back to you and says he's flipped this house, you look at the plans and the plat rather, and it conforms, there is no meeting. This is over. Am I correct?
If the applicant chooses to withdraw the application, then yes, it would be over, and it would be a simple notification to you all and the folks who received the notification that the applicant has withdrawn this request.
Very good. Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, at this time then, I'd like to thank Jeremy for coming on as our new permanent member of the board.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank the members of the community for coming forward and participating in this discussion and this unique forum. Thank you for your patience with our technology. We appreciated having your input. Thank you to our applicant for your patience as we navigated the new technology. And with that, I'm going to say that our next regular meeting date is Thursday, June 4th, 2020. However, we have our continuing date of May 27th, which we just established. Any further comment or business from the board? All right, at this time, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
Motion from Jeremy,
Second.
seconded from Leo. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion has been made and carried. This meeting is adjourned and we will reconvene on May 27th at 4 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Julie.
you.
Good job.